Hello and welcome. I'm Helen Drury and I'm Director of Curriculum Programmes for Art Curriculum Plus. And I am really looking forward to spending some time exploring with you the approaches to fluency and practice in high-performing schools. This is just a brilliant time to have the opportunity to speak with you about achievement in maths because it's over a decade now since Amanda Spielman and Lucy Heller appointed me to work across the ARC network on primary and secondary maths. And when I joined ARC, there were 3 primary schools, 8 secondary schools. The 3 primary schools were ARC Globe Academy, ARC Academy, and King Solomon Academy. And when I joined, the focus was really on looking to evidence in the sense of practice across the country, practice within and beyond the network, and also research evidence as to what was going to make the greatest difference to the attainment and wider achievement and enjoyment of maths of children, particularly those children who were starting or continuing their education at some kind of disadvantage. So it was a real privilege to collaborate with the teachers in those 3 schools, and then quite swiftly they were joined by a further 6 schools in London and Birmingham, making a larger network of 9 primary schools, all really dedicated to finding out what was going to make that difference to every child. So there were lots of discussions and conversations, lots of collaboration between the schools, opportunity to immerse in the research literature, so to look at the kind of UK but also international research base into the most effective practice in the teaching of mathematics, and also to spend time in classrooms with pupils, with teachers, seeing what was happening and what was making the difference on the ground and in schools. And around that time, the Department for Education was writing the 2014 version of the national curriculum, and I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to be on the expert panel for that group. And so the research and the thinking I was doing with teachers within the ARC network, and also to inform the national curriculum, is to some extent captured and explored in my first book, which is Mastering Maths. The reason that this is such a timely opportunity, and I'm so pleased to be talking to you now, is that since then, schools within and beyond the ARC network have taken some of those ideas and have actually tried and tested them in the classroom, applied them, and seen what impact they have, what changes need to be made, what adaptations need to be made. And what I'm able to share with you now is which of those seem to be kind of the highest leverage approaches to make the biggest difference to young people. This really is an exciting time to be talking with you about this, because not only has the ARC network of schools grown from the initial 3 and then 9 primary schools to a network of 24 primaries across Birmingham, Portsmouth, Hastings and London, but thanks to the support of many philanthropists and the Education Endowment Foundation, we've had the opportunity to grow the partnership of schools collaborating on the most effective evidence-informed approaches to teaching maths to a network of hundreds of schools across the UK. And so I'm able to share with you now some of what they have found to be the most effective practices in their contexts across the UK. And this really is a story worth telling, because the teachers and school leaders across this wider partnership of schools have just had the most phenomenal impact. And when you think particularly about the challenges of the past few years and the disruption caused by COVID, the difference that they've been making to pupils' experience of learning and achieving in maths is really impressive. And so I hope that over the next half hour, 40 minutes, you'll find something that's useful, valuable, or at the very least thought-provoking, that you can take away. So I in a moment of weakness, agreed with my colleagues that it was important for there to be takeaways from this webinar, which ever so slightly goes against everything I believe about professional development. So the evidence is clear. We need professional development to be sustained. It needs to be collaborative. Well, I very much hope to work with many of you in some kind of sustained way over time. But at the moment, all we have is less than an hour together right now, and I really appreciate the time that you're spending listening. And as far as collaboration goes, we will absolutely use the chat. We'll absolutely have some discussion, and we'll make sure that there's time for question and answer at the end. But collaborative opportunities on Zoom are limited. So I'm told, in the absence of sustained professional development and collaborative opportunities, what you need is takeaways, and that's what we've gone for here. So there are three main ideas or activities or approaches that I hope that you might want to take away from today's session. So an approach that focuses on the achievement of every child, teaching mathematics in a way that's authentic to the discipline of maths, and being purposeful in your practice in school. So they're the themes for our time together now. Because I know it can be helpful, here's a little bit of a contents, an overview, an agenda, if you like, for the webinar. So a bit of an introduction to the decade of learning in partnership, and then we'll take each of the takeaways in turn: every child, authentic maths, and purposeful practice. And then they'll have a little time at the end for exploring what might be next. So who are we here at ARC Curriculum Plus? Well, from the initial collaboration within the ARC network, we had the opportunity, thanks to the Education Endowment Foundation, to take those evidence-informed approaches to teaching maths and to put them to the test in a larger number of schools beyond ARC. So 30 pioneer schools joined us in 2012, and with them we demonstrated that through using these approaches and working in partnership, teachers could give children the opportunity to make at least 2 months additional progress per year than in schools that weren't part of the partnership and weren't using these approaches. And from that initial 30 schools, we've now grown to a partnership of over 600 schools across the nation, and we're working with over 15 multi-academy trusts. So we're a mission-driven non-profit, but what do we actually do? So we look to the research around the most effective approaches to curriculum, to pedagogy and teacher development, and to assessment at all the levels, so on a kind of annual comparative level, but also termly, unit by unit, and within each lesson, kind of a formative assessment. We look to the most effective of those, and crucially, we integrate those into a cohesive support program for teachers, so that their approaches, the decisions they're making around curriculum, are connected with the pedagogy and professional development they're getting, and to their approach to assessment. So yes, we start with the curriculum. We are ARC Curriculum Plus, so we carefully sequence and resource that curriculum from early years, so from reception through Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, and we also have a secondary programme, and so that continues through Key Stages 3 and 4. And then we have induction training for leaders and for teachers, because it is so important that the thinking behind the approaches that our collaboration of teachers has chosen to take is shared with teachers that join that partnership. So wherever possible, that's face-to-face, it's in person, and it's an opportunity for teachers to hear about the curriculum, the pedagogy, and the assessment that's really making the biggest difference. And it doesn't stop with induction, of course, so that professional development's ongoing. both a kind of 2-3 year sustained professional development opportunity for teachers and for leaders to develop as mathematics specialists, and then looking at specific topics. So the most effective ways of teaching fractions, the most effective ways of teaching geometry. Then we look kind of unit by unit. So for the week that's coming up, for the fortnight that's coming up, what are the kind of highest leverage approaches to teaching this particular topic? What's the prerequisite knowledge or skills that the children you're teaching might need? What can you do if that's not where they're at? What might be kind of likely errors or misconceptions that they might bring or they might form during the unit? How will you know that they're successful? How can you make sure that there's sufficient scaffolding and challenge for them? And then really importantly, we also try and integrate what we're learning about really effective approaches into the resources themselves. So as well as including them in the planning guidance, they're also sort of built in to the design of the tasks and activities, the structure of the assessment that we share with our partner schools. And it really is a partnership, and so lots of what I'm sharing with you today is what we've learnt from the schools that we work with, and continuing that conversation and that collaboration, and making sure that we keep identifying emergent needs, and working together to find solutions to those, is a really important part of what we do. And then the maths leaders. The maths leads are a network within a network. We have a specific course for them, and make sure that they're really supported by our math specialists and by each other to make the biggest difference possible with their colleagues in school. So I'm lucky to be able to draw on the incredible experiences and expertise of a large number of schools while talking to you today. And many of those are the schools within the ARC network, and they have seen real impact from their work in maths. So as well as being a very high performing trust across the board, there's a real exceptional difference being made for pupils eligible for pupil premium, where the proportion of pupil premium eligible children who meet national expectations is not only greater than the pupil premiums achievement nationally, but actually they exceed the attainment of all pupils nationally. So 63% of pupils in ARC schools eligible for pupil premium achieved national expectations, compared with 59% nationally. And within the ARC network, it's great to see an increasing group of a growing group of schools where kind of 90% or higher of the pupils are achieving national expectations, and a growing proportion are achieving at greater depth. So that's one of the groups that I think it's important for us to focus on and to learn from in thinking about effective practices in primary maths. But there's another group, which is schools who have made some significant improvement. So I want us to spend a little bit of time thinking about this particular school, who joined us in 2020, and the school is in the top quintile for deprivation. There's a high proportion of children who have special educational needs and disabilities, considerable number with EHCP, and that there's a level of challenge that the school is tackling. And back in 2019, so just before they joined the partnership, this is what they were achieving. So 65% of the children in year 6 achieved the expected standard in the SATs, and you can see 14% were achieving at greater depth. And I guess I want to give you a moment to consider how you think they're doing at that stage, and just have a bit of a pause to consider that, and I suppose to mull over what might be possible. Obviously, this school, as they joined us in 2020, were facing additional challenge with all of the disruption of the pandemic. But yes, it's a school with a high level of need. And because of that level of need and the challenge the school were facing, we were absolutely delighted this July to hear from them and to have them share their SATs success with us. So a real increase to 78%, 77.5% of the pupils achieving the expected standard, and up to 40% working at greater depth. So a real phenomenal improvement. And what I want to focus on in this webinar is what their story is. What is it that they changed about their practice? What is it that they were doing that made a difference to those young people? The Year 1 pupils from our first pioneer schools back in 2012 took their Year 6 SATs in 2018, and then our second cohort took SATs in 2019, and then of course there was COVID, and so there was a period where SATs was no longer the main focus, and so I guess in this webinar today, in the time that we've got, I really want us to think about a possible tension that there might be between providing 7-8 years of a really high quality maths education and really focusing on pupils getting the maximum attainment in the SATs. And perhaps that doesn't have to be a tension. And I think what we've seen from the schools that we work with is that they are able to really focus on a high quality maths education and to see those high stakes assessments as kind of a component part of that wider piece. So I'm going to give you some time to read through this statement. This is from the school whose results I shared with you, who made the significant improvement from 2019 to 2022. And this is the maths curriculum intent statement that they share on their website. So just a little bit of time to think through what strikes you and what do you think is significant here. For me, the most kind of the messages that stand out change every time actually that I engage with this, but I think the real focus on the importance of maths for life, so for future studies, for the world of work, for just being a mathematical human being, their focus there is really stand out for me. And then in the second paragraph, looking at the importance of conceptual understanding of mathematical communication and mathematical thinking. I think actually I haven't highlighted it here, but that sort of the importance of all learners enjoying and succeeding in maths regardless of their starting point is arguably something which you might want to pull out as well. Now, it may have been under duress, but you were promised takeaways, and so here they are. So we're going to look at the theme of every child, theme of authentic mathematics, and the theme of purposeful practice. And we will kick off by taking a look at that focus on high expectations for every child. So as I say, we're looking here at schools where 95, nearly 100% of pupils are reaching those national expectations in the Key Stage 2 SATs, and also at schools where the proportion of pupils who are achieving that benchmark has significantly increased over time. And when you go into either of those contexts, there is something which is just absolutely palpable from the moment that you walk in, and that is the belief that the head teacher, the maths lead, the teachers and the pupils themselves, the whole community of the school really holds around what is possible for every child. And it's absolutely tangible, and it is, I think it's the most important thing that makes a difference. And so it's that belief in every child that makes the difference. Now, different people obviously have had different experiences of school. Some people have positive experiences of learning maths throughout, but there are, and I suspect there may well be some of you listening now, who at some point, and it can be very often at Key Stage 2, go from enjoying maths lessons as a lesson amongst others, and feeling pretty confident in their maths, pretty happy in learning maths, to starting to experience, it might be a particular topic or just a series of lessons where for kind of question after question, task after task, lesson after lesson, that there are questions and the right answer to those questions just eludes you. So you know that you're supposed to know, and it's been explained, or there's been a modelling, but you don't know how to get the right answer, and you're sat there and you can see that there are other children in the room, your peers, your friends, who do know how to get this elusive right answer, but you don't know how. And that experience of starting to see yourself as somebody who just can't do this maths thing, and starting to see maths as something kind of other, is, I think, the fundamental problem with underperformance and underachievement in mathematics. If we can keep every single child knowing that they are naturally mathematical and have every opportunity to succeed with maths, that is the one thing that's going to make a really significant difference to outcomes, to achievement, and to what's possible in the learning of maths. So there are these three kind of takeaways within the takeaway for high expectations for every child. And the first is just really trying to avoid making any assumptions or grouping children except in a really purposeful way. So absolutely, if you've done a particular piece of formative assessment and you know that a certain group of children, a few children, are going to benefit from some additional scaffolding or from some additional challenge, then absolutely, that's brilliant. That's absolutely what they need. That's great. But those groupings need to be purposeful and flexible, and for a particular moment, a particular activity, maybe a particular lesson, perhaps for an intervention. But the reason that those children are together and are being given some kind of different experience needs to be based on an assessment, and that can be a really informal assessment. That might be that you've overheard something that they've said, or you've had a conversation with them about maths. But the information that you have, the assessment that you have, needs to be really relevant to that particular topic or particular activity that they're engaging in. So not deciding that across all of a whole term or a whole year that a group of children need to be on the hexagon table or need to be on the circle table or need a completely different experience from their peers, because it's so important that everybody, the children themselves and the teachers and any additional adults in the classroom, keep it in mind that every child has got the potential to be successful, and that we're just about making sure that the right scaffolding's in place at the right time to get them to that success. So grouping, where necessary, fine, but it does need to be really flexible and just for a particular purpose, and wherever possible, the same task, the same opportunity for every child. Another thing that's really noticeable when we speak with leaders and teachers in the schools that have seen a real impact in their maths outcomes is taking opportunity to do pre-teaching. And this can take very many different forms. It can be quite informal or very structured. It can be same-day interventions every day, or it can be per week, or perhaps just every couple of weeks. In some schools, it focuses on the use of concrete manipulatives and representations. In other schools, it can focus on vocabulary and teaching really key terminology to the pupils. So one of the maths leads told us about how some of the children who have some difficulties with their reading get the opportunity to be introduced to a few key words for each unit before the teaching of the unit, and they become kind of experts in that terminology because having met the word before, when the teacher's introducing it to the class, they can help give examples of that term, and obviously they get the advantage then of having had a little bit more increased exposure to that vocabulary, which gives them a little bit of a head start and helps them to catch up or keep up with that concept. And then the third kind of takeaway in the theme of having high expectations for every child is this idea of differentiating not by the content of the mathematics that different children are engaging in, but differentiating through the depth. So that means making sure that the mathematics is low threshold, so every child is able to begin to access the activity, to get thinking, to get mathematical, and that the opportunities for additional challenge are also open to every child. So the differentiation comes through the kind of the richness, to some extent the openness of that task. So kind of three main takeaways within that idea of high expectations for every child, which have really made a difference across these high performing schools. So when I spoke to one of the maths leads in one of these successful schools, she said, first and foremost, I would say it's building on the child's confidence. Firstly, we encourage mistake making in our lessons, so I think that's a massive part, and ensuring that children enjoy maths. Children that I've taught across my career have been very afraid of making mistakes. They have a very fixed mindset. So lots of the children will come into our classes and say, I'm rubbish at maths, I can't do maths. My scores reflect that. And I think what was powerful about how she described the practice in her school, and this is something which you see time and time again in the schools that are really seeing a difference, particularly in less advantaged contexts, that they are so focused as a staff and as a school community on making sure that the children have an identity as a successful mathematician, and that they have opportunities to succeed, to be recognised as succeeding in maths, that they get the support that they need, and also that they know that the making of mistakes is part of learning maths. So that can be celebrated, that mistakes can be seen as an opportunity to learn and to improve. The second takeaway we have is about the importance of pupils' learning of mathematics being an authentic mathematical experience. So we're going to look in this section at the power of talk, at the importance of mathematics being meaningful, and also at how every child is empowered to think mathematically and the importance of that as part of a maths education. In our initial collaboration over 10 years ago now, and in the research that we explored back then, we were really looking with two foci. So firstly, looking at those pupils who would go on to really thrive in secondary maths, post-16, degree level and beyond, and were going on to be our successful mathematicians and scientists. What is it that they were really succeeding in? What was it that marked them out as being more successful than their peers? And the second focus, arguably more the priority, was around where pupils are less successful in maths learning. What is it that's standing in their way? So we know that the aims of the national curriculum are about every child being fluent, being able to reason, and being able to solve problems. Well, what stops you from doing that really well? And the first thing which can stop you is if the symbols, the words that we use in maths, have stopped having any kind of meaning or have a superficial meaning without depth. And so it's really, really important, and the research literature is clear on this, that children have the opportunity to use objects and pictures, words and symbols together, and to make connections between those so that the mathematical concepts that they're working with are really meaningful. And what's interesting is that for high-performing, high-attaining children, deepening that conceptual understanding is a huge, huge advantage. So spending more time making sure that, although they may be able to get the right answer, they may understand the concept at some level, deepening the understanding of that and encouraging them to represent it in different ways and to kind of shift beyond their comfort zone in those representations really makes it much more likely that they're going to be more successful in their later maths education. And then the second dimension of depth is around language and communication. And again, this is a huge barrier for those children who may have low prior attainment in maths. And so any work that we can do to support and encourage pupils to talk mathematically is going to make a big difference. It's also hugely advantageous for high prior attainers to work on their explanation and their justification and to discuss in full sentences using accurate mathematical vocabulary. And so it's a benefit for every child, regardless of their background and their previous experience or attainment, to be really focusing on language. And it's something which we've taken a relatively unusual approach to in the Maths Mastery Partnership, because the maths literature often endorses and encourages discussion in maths lessons, and you can get some great outcomes from that approach, and it's certainly something that we support too. So open-ended questions and discussion. However, we've found that kind of particularly with the vocabulary gap, some pupils can find that if there's lots of open-ended discussion and very limited kind of explicit vocabulary instruction and introduction, that you end up widening the gap rather than narrowing it there. And so we have a kind of combined approach where you have some less structured tasks with opportunities for exploration and discussion, but also some more guided, more explicit instruction in using correct mathematical terminology and full sentence answers. And then the third dimension of depth is about the kind of importance of recognizing that mathematical thinking is something innate, and we experience this ourselves as young people, and those of us who have worked in early years and Key Stage 1 or through family have spent time with younger learners know that kind of innate desire to try and come up with a rule that will always work, or to break the rule, to find counterexamples to that rule, to compare and to seek out patterns in shape, in number, and in life more generally, is just, it's a joyful thing that we all do as humans. And so making sure that maths lessons are a place to celebrate that and support children to develop that ability, not just in the early years and perhaps Key Stage 1, but throughout Key Stage 2, is a really important part of the approach that we take. A focus on SATs and SAT success can almost counterintuitively sometimes distract from these three really well evidenced approaches. And I think particularly towards the end of upper key stage 2, sometimes it can be the case that communication skills, conceptual understanding, and thinking like a mathematician are not given the priority and attention that they need for children to receive a really high quality maths education. As I say, the dimensions of depth were developed through immersion in the research literature and engagement with the kind of early ARC pilot schools and then the pioneer schools. And some of that thinking is within my first book. And so it's been really important for us to go and visit the schools where they're seeing a significant improvement in their outcomes at the end of Key Stage 2, or those really kind of high, above 90% attainment outcomes, and to see what it is that they're actually doing, informed by the emphasis that we place on talk, on thinking, on conceptual understanding. And I have to say that of those three, it's definitely talk, which is most often given the priority, and that teachers and leaders, and actually often the children themselves, talk about as being really, really powerful. And I think that's particularly true in those schools that are working in more deprived contexts. The resources that we share for each lesson include a talk task, so as well as star words and STEM sentences and guidance around vocabulary and talk, and lots of encouragement and promotion of talk throughout the lesson. We do have these talk tasks which the children as well as the teachers get really accustomed to as a part of learning mathematics. And you can see here some of the quotes from the teachers in schools that we're working with around the power of talk as they've experienced it. Our second dimension of depth is conceptual understanding, and again, this is something which, when we look to see what's making the difference in the schools that are really seeing significant impact, that focus on understanding, on representation, and on the use of manipulatives is there. So the quote that I'm sharing with you here is one approach that's been taken, and here what they want to be happening is the children having the opportunity to access and choose their own manipulatives. Now, it's really important to say that's not necessarily the only approach. There are other schools that we work with who have seen successes with a more structured kind of teacher-led approach to representation and to manipulatives. But what's exciting for me here is that the maths lead and her team are really recognising that the use of resources, the use of manipulatives, is much, much more than just an opportunity for scaffolding and for learners to help themselves to independently reach a solution to a question or to a problem, but actually that manipulatives and representations can be an opportunity to extend your thinking, to stretch and challenge yourself, and that the children in this particular school are encouraged to not use representation only to support, to scaffold, and to get to a solution, but also to challenge themselves and to see if they can use maybe an unfamiliar representation or can represent a concept or a value or an idea in a new way. And again, here there are some quotes from teachers within and beyond the ARC network around what they have found their experience to be of that increased focus on the meaning in maths and on conceptual understanding. The third dimension of depth is mathematical thinking, and again, it's absolutely key to transforming mathematics achievement. And again, different schools have emphasised different aspects and taken different approaches. So for some, the focus on talk is what leads to and facilitates that increased emphasis on mathematical thinking. So for example, having a kind of a reasoning stem sentence, such as I know that, and so I know. There might be something around, always being challenged to find how many different ways, or challenging other people's, how did you know? Can you explain? So that focus on reasoning and thinking mathematically and looking to seek patterns is a crucial element of deepening the mathematical understanding of every child. We move on now to the third of the takeaways. So we looked at the importance of high expectations for every child. We've had a bit of a look at making the mathematical learning experience an authentic one, and now we're going to look at purposeful practice. And this is interesting because in some ways, some of what the schools talk about and prioritise under this kind of broad takeaway can come in tension with the previous two. So firstly, maths meetings. So we advocate for a really kind of deep, focused approach where each mathematical idea, for example, the equivalence of fractions, has 2, 3, 4 weeks of focus in maths lesson time. And we also know that it's important to keep some mathematical ideas on the boil. So, for example, the learning of the concept of time really isn't something that can effectively happen in a week or 2 weeks or even 3 of 50-minute, hour-long maths lessons. And it lends itself much better to kind of little and often revisiting on ideally a daily basis. And so, borrowed from some really effective practice in the States, we advocate maths meetings, which are ideally daily, sometimes kind of 3 to 5 times a week, about 10 minutes, often kind of nice for after lunchtime. And in those sessions, there's a few different things that teachers prioritise. Firstly, kind of making sure that number sense and some of the key ideas around number and arithmetic are kind of kept on the boil. Secondly, some of those ideas like identifying particular shapes or maybe metric conversions, some of those things which lend themselves better to the little and often approach and kind of being interleaved and constantly retrieved across the year rather than an in-depth approach for a good week or two at some particular point in a term. Those concepts get a little bit of attention in maths meetings. They're also a really effective opportunity for teachers to, having identified perhaps a common error or a misconception or something that just needs a little bit more practice and reinforcement, to reinforce ideas that the class seems to need a bit more practice in from previous topics that have been taught in the year. So that time, sort of ideally daily, kind of quite fast-paced, whole class, interactive session, different from the authentic mathematical experience of the maths lesson, but still with some mathematical thinking, representation and talk present, but a bit more quickfire, a bit more focused on fluency, if you like, than on reasoning and problem solving. So maths meetings and making sure that there's time for those on a regular basis is certainly a feature of the schools that we found seeing the greatest impact. Another feature, another takeaway, if you will, is around arithmetic practice. And in some of the schools that we've been working with, that starts to take the place of 1 or 2 maths meetings each week. So you have your normal, if you like, maths meetings on most days, but a bit of a practice arithmetic test or a recap of some arithmetic work on other days. In others, it might be a little bit of time on a particular day of the week, borrowing a little bit of maths lesson time perhaps, to really look in on practicing that arithmetic and honing those skills. And then the third takeaway is something which it's been exciting to see schools developing, particularly in upper key stage 2, which is the idea that a lot of the recall and the practice and some of the fluency that's necessary for becoming a successful mathematician can happen outside of the kind of main part of a maths lesson. So we include in our induction training and in our planning guidance transitions, so that particularly in key stage 1, but also in lower key stage 2, as children move from the carpet to their tables, back to the carpet, they might be skip counting, they might be chanting a counting rhyme, that those opportunities of kind of the downtime within a lesson can be used to recap those facts. And we've heard some really fantastic stories from the schools that are seeing that impressive impact around kind of using time queuing for lunch, time in assembly, different year groups, demonstrating the rolling of numbers to other year groups, that there can be real opportunities in the playground, that all of those times where you might otherwise be waiting can be used to reinforce, to practice, to rehearse some of the key facts that are needed for success in maths. I don't know, could what we've been talking about so far in this webinar just be ignoring the high attainment in SAT circle and just focusing on high quality maths education? I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think what we've seen is that successful schools that are really making a difference for the young people that they work with are seeing the high attainment in the SATs as a part of that broader picture, as a part of the importance of a high quality maths education. But I don't want to suggest that that is in any way easy, because there are some significant tensions at play here. And actually, one of the things that I think marks those schools with the greatest impact, that sort of sets them aside, is their willingness to really engage with those tensions and to make a call. So we've talked about the importance of high expectations for every child and believing in every child, and those children being confident and seeing themselves as successful mathematicians. And we've also talked about, particularly in upper key stage 2, preparation for those high stakes assessments and the need for purposeful practice. And as is eloquently expressed here by one of the maths leads in our partnership, that it can be really tricky. So you want to discuss the results with the children. If they've done a practice assessment, you want them to know what they can do to improve. But the last thing that you want, if you're trying to build a culture where children identify as being successful learners of maths, is for them to start thinking that that's not what they are. So those really difficult choices about, exactly how many assessments, marked assessments, is it actually helpful for the children to engage with? And if they are taking an assessment, do they need to see how they did on that assessment, or is it enough, is it most useful for the teacher to be able to identify if there are any kind of gaps or particular needs that the class or individuals need to focus on, and if at some point you are choosing to share the scoring sheet with the children, being really, really clear about why it is that you're doing that, and making sure that the advantages around those children being able to take ownership of their learning and address the needs that they've got, and kind of have additional practice in those particular areas, are what's happening, and is outweighing the disadvantages that are caused by them starting to stop believing, starting to doubt in themselves as mathematicians. Another important and difficult tension is between the authenticity of the maths learning experience and that purposeful approach, particularly in the run-up to SATs. And again, it's a tension, and it's one that school leadership teams do well to engage with critically and to make their own call on. But one of the maths leads who we spoke to that's seen real impact has come to the conclusion that actually sticking as closely as possible to those dimensions of depth, so foregrounding the thinking mathematically, the conceptual understanding, and in particular she's talking here about talk tasks, is a crucial part of children maximising their chances of success at Key Stage 2. And so rather than kind of narrowing down the maths curriculum into much more of a quiet SATs practice, test preparation approach for as long as possible, keeping what she calls the 6-part structure, which is including some short inputs from the teacher, but also opportunities for the children to talk with each other and to work independently on low threshold, high ceiling tasks, is an important part of what's making them successful. That brings us to the final slide of the presentation, and I really hope that the 3 takeaways with each of their 3 sub-takeaways has been, as I say, at the very least thought-provoking, and I hope useful for your work in schools. And I really look forward to hearing from you in the future about what you've done and how you've implemented and built on the ideas that we've been exploring today. So thank you very much.